Some places remember the dead. That was what the old gas station clerk had told Evelyn Frost 40 minutes before her car died in the middle of Black Hollow Forest. At the time, she had forced a polite smile, bought stale coffee, and ignored the warning painted across his tired face. Now, standing beside her silent car, while freezing rain soaked through her gray coat, she wished she had listened. The forest stretched endlessly around her, dark pine trees swaying beneath a silver moon hidden behind clouds. No traffic, no signal, no sound except the wind moving through the cemetery gates 50 yards ahead. Evelyn wrapped her arms tighter around herself and looked at her dead phone screen again. Nothing. Perfect, she muttered under her breath. Her headlights flickered weakly behind her, casting pale beams across crooked gravestones and rusted iron fencing. The place looked abandoned for centuries. Then she heard it. Evelyn. Her breath stopped. The voice was low, male, close enough to feel against her skin. She spun around instantly, boots crunching against wet gravel. Nobody stood behind her. Only rows of graves disappearing into fog. The cold deepened. Not normal cold. Heavy cold. The kind that pressed against your lungs. Evelyn took a slow step backward toward her car. That was when she saw him. A tall figure stood motionless near the center of the cemetery beside a cracked marble angel. Black coat, dark hair touching his shoulders in loose waves. Pale face half hidden beneath drifting mist. He looked less like a man and more like part of the night itself. For one impossible second, Evelyn thought he wasn't real. Then his eyes opened. Crimson, faintly glowing beneath the rain. Every nerve in her body screamed to run. But she couldn't move. The stranger simply watched her from across the graves with an expression so calm it felt unnatural. No breath fogged from his lips. No movement disturbed the long black coat hanging from his frame. The storm itself seemed to avoid touching him. Evelyn swallowed hard. Hey, she called shakily, trying to sound braver than she felt. Do you know if there's a road nearby? No answer. Only silence. Then lightning split. Across the sky, white light flooded the cemetery for half a second. And Evelyn finally saw the gravestone behind him. Her blood turned to ice. Evelyn Frost, born 1991, died October 17th, tonight. Her heartbeat stumbled painfully inside her chest. That's not possible, she whispered. The man tilted his head slightly. Slow, curious, ancient. Then, for the first time, he stepped closer. The man moved through the rain without a sound. No footsteps, no shifting gravel. 1 second, he stood 20 yards away beside the gravestone, and the next he was standing at the edge of the iron fence watching her with those deep crimson eyes. Evelyn's pulse hammered painfully in her ears. She forced herself backward until her legs hit the side of her car. Who are you? She whispered again. The stranger did not answer immediately. His gaze drifted past her shoulder toward the headlights flickering weakly through the rain. Then he looked back at her with an expression she could not understand. Not hunger. Not anger. Something colder. Something older. You should not be here tonight, he said softly. His voice carried through the storm like silk dragged across glass. Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. Up close, he looked impossible. His skin was pale enough to glow beneath the moonlight. Dark curls brushed the collar of his black coat, damp from the rain, but somehow untouched by mud or wind. And his eyes, they were not human eyes. They burned faintly red beneath thick shadows like dying embers refusing to fade. Evelyn swallowed hard. There is a gravestone with my name on it. The man glanced toward the cemetery again. Yes. Her stomach dropped at the calmness in his answer. That is not funny. It was not meant to be. Thunder rolled above the forest. The trees groaned in the distance like something alive moving between them. Evelyn tried to laugh, but the sound died in her throat. Okay, I do not know what kind of prank this is, but I am leaving. She reached for her car door handle. The stranger's expression changed instantly. Do not. The single word froze her in place. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Multiple. Fast. Voices echoed somewhere deep beyond the cemetery gates. Men. Shouting through the storm. Flashlights cut through the trees in quick, white beams. The stranger turned his head slightly, as if listening to something far away. For the first time, Evelyn saw tension move through his face. They found me sooner than I expected, he murmured. Who found you? She asked. Before he could answer, a sharp mechanical click echoed from the darkness. Then another. Red laser dots appeared across the stranger's chest beneath his black coat. Evelyn's breath caught. Armed men emerged slowly from the fog between the graves wearing dark tactical jackets marked with silver symbols she did not recognize. One of them raised a flashlight toward Evelyn's face. "Step away from him now," the man shouted. "You do not understand what he is." The stranger beside her smiled faintly. Not amused. Not kind. Ancient. Tired. Then his cold fingers suddenly closed around Evelyn's wrist. The moment their skin touched, burning red light exploded beneath her veins. Heat tore through Evelyn's arm, like liquid fire racing beneath her skin. She gasped and stumbled forward as glowing crimson lines spread from the stranger's hand around her wrist, curling upward like ancient symbols waking after centuries asleep. The rain around them suddenly stopped. Not completely, just around him. Around them. The storm bent strangely in the air, as if the night itself had frozen for one impossible second. The armed men standing between the graves lowered their weapons slightly. Fear flashed across their faces. Real fear. "Impossible," one of them whispered. The stranger released Evelyn's wrist slowly, his crimson eyes fixed on the glowing marks beneath her skin. For the first time since she had seen him, his calm expression cracked. Shock. Genuine shock. Evelyn stared down at the symbols burning beneath her pale skin. They looked alive, moving faintly beneath her veins before fading into a dim red glow. "What did you do to me?" she breathed. The stranger looked at her, as though he had forgotten the hunters were even there. That should not have happened. One of the men stepped forward carefully, silver rain dripping from his flashlight. "Lucien," he said quietly. "Move away from the human." Lucien. The name settled heavily into the freezing air. Evelyn looked back toward the stranger beside her. Lucien did not move. The hunter's jaw tightened. "You know what the mark means." Lucien's expression darkened slightly. "Be careful what you say next." The hunter hesitated. Around them, the cemetery seemed unnaturally silent. No wind. No insects. Even the forest had gone still. Evelyn could hear only her own heartbeat and the distant sound of thunder rolling somewhere beyond the mountains. "Someone explain this to me right now," she demanded, trying to steady her shaking voice. None of them answered immediately. Then the oldest hunter slowly lowered his weapon and looked directly at Evelyn. "Miss Frost," he said carefully, "that symbol has not appeared in over 400 years." Evelyn frowned. "What symbol?" Lucien finally spoke. "A blood bond." The words hit harder than the cold. Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. "That is insane." "Yes," Lucien said softly. "It is." Lightning flashed again across the cemetery, illuminating his pale face beneath the rain. Up close, he looked even less human now. Ancient exhaustion lingered behind his crimson eyes, like someone who had spent centuries carrying memories too heavy to survive. Evelyn realized suddenly that he was watching her carefully. Not like prey. Not even like a stranger. Like someone terrified she might disappear. The hunter stepped forward again. "If the bond is active, then she cannot stay here." Lucien's gaze never left Evelyn. "I know. Then bring her with you before the others arrive." Evelyn's stomach dropped. The others? Somewhere deep in the forest beyond the graves, something answered with a low, distant howl. The howl echoed again through the forest. Closer this time. Not human. Not animal either. Evelyn felt the sound vibrate deep inside her chest like the night itself was warning her to run. The hunters immediately turned toward the trees beyond the cemetery fence. Their flashlights swept across the darkness in sharp, nervous movements. One of them spoke quietly into a radio clipped to his jacket, but only static answered back. Lucien's expression hardened. "They are already here." Evelyn looked between the armed men and the pale stranger standing beside her. "Who is here?" she demanded. No one answered fast enough. The fog between the trees began to move strangely. Not drifting. Crawling. Thick gray mist rolled across the cemetery ground in slow waves, swallowing gravestones one by one. The temperature dropped so sharply Evelyn could suddenly see her own breath clouding the air. The oldest hunter cursed under his breath. "This is impossible. They should not be this far north." Lucien stepped in front of Evelyn without warning, placing himself between her and the forest. His long black coat shifted lightly in the wind as crimson light flickered faintly beneath his eyes again. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. Something moved inside the fog. Tall shapes. Watching. Evelyn strained her eyes, but every time lightning flashed, the figures vanished again. Her pulse climbed higher with every second. I do not understand what is happening, she whispered. Lucien glanced back at her over his shoulder. For one brief moment, the ancient coldness in his face faded. You were never supposed to meet me tonight. Another howl split through the cemetery. Closer now. The iron gates rattled violently behind them. Several hunters raised silver knives instead of guns this time. Their fear had become obvious. Real. One of the younger men looked directly at Lucien. If they smell the bond, they will come for her first. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Stop talking about me like I am not standing here. Lucien finally turned fully toward her. Rain slid slowly down his pale face, but his gaze never wavered from hers. Listen carefully, he said softly. No matter what you hear in the next few minutes, do not leave my side. Why? A strange sadness passed through his crimson eyes. Because there are creatures in this world far worse than me. Suddenly the cemetery lights flickered. One by one, the old lanterns lining the path snapped dark until only moonlight remained. Then silence fell completely. No thunder. No wind. Nothing. Evelyn realized the forest had stopped breathing. Lucien slowly lifted his head toward the trees. Too late, he murmured. A pair of glowing silver eyes opened inside the fog. The silver eyes inside the fog did not blink. They hovered low between the trees at first, almost hidden beneath drifting mist, then slowly rose higher. Too high. Higher than any normal person could stand. Evelyn's throat tightened as another pair appeared beside them. Then another. Pale shapes moved silently through the darkness beyond the cemetery fence, circling closer with unnatural patience. One of the hunters backed away a step. There are too many, he whispered. Lucien remained perfectly still in front of Evelyn, but the air around him had changed. The cold pouring from him felt heavier now. Ancient and dangerous like the storm itself had taken human form. Do not look directly into their eyes, he said quietly. Evelyn stared at the glowing figures moving through the fog. What are they? Lucien's jaw tightened slightly. The Forgotten. The name alone seemed to affect the hunters. Several of them exchanged nervous glances while gripping silver weapons tighter. Evelyn frowned. That does not explain anything. One of the creatures suddenly stepped closer into the moonlight. Evelyn's breath caught instantly. It looked human at first glance. Tall, thin, dressed in torn black fabric that moved strangely in the wind. But its skin was pale gray like frozen stone, and its silver eyes glowed without pupils or emotion. The creature tilted its head slowly toward Evelyn. Then it smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly, hungrily. Evelyn instinctively stepped backward until her shoulder brushed Lucien's arm. The creature stopped moving the second she touched him. The glowing marks beneath her skin pulsed faintly red again. A low whisper spread through the cemetery. The Forgotten had started speaking to each other in a language she could not understand. The sound reminded her of dry leaves scraping across old graves. Lucien's expression darkened immediately. They can smell the bond. What does that mean? Evelyn asked. He looked down at her briefly, crimson eyes softer than before. It means they know you belong to me now. Her stomach dropped. I do not belong to anyone. For the first time, Lucien almost smiled. Faint. Tired. No. Suddenly, every creature in the fog lifted its head toward the sky at the exact same moment. The movement was so synchronized it barely looked real. Then the cemetery gates exploded open beneath a violent gust of wind. The hunters immediately formed a line in front of Evelyn and Lucien as silver lanterns ignited around the graves. Shadows raced across the ground unnaturally fast. The Forgotten began stepping through the gates one by one. Silent. Calm. Endless. Evelyn's heartbeat thundered inside her chest. Lucien, she whispered shakily. Tell me the truth. What exactly are you? The pale vampire king kept his eyes fixed on the approaching creatures. I am the reason they still fear the dark. The Forgotten moved through the cemetery like shadows slipping beneath water. Silent. Weightless. Their pale gray faces remained emotionless as they stepped between the gravestones under the cold silver lanterns. Evelyn counted at least 20 of them now emerging from the fog beyond the gates. Maybe more. It was impossible to tell where the mist ended and their bodies began. The hunters held their ground, but fear had settled heavily across every face. Lucien stood unmoving in front of Evelyn, while the crimson glow beneath his eyes slowly intensified. The air around him felt charged now, sharp with pressure like lightning seconds before a storm breaks. Evelyn looked down at the fading marks beneath her wrist again. The symbols pulsed softly every time Lucien moved closer. "What do they want from me?" she whispered. Lucien answered without turning around. "You." One of the Forgotten stepped farther forward than the others, taller than the rest. Its long black coat dragged across the wet cemetery path, while silver eyes fixed directly onto Evelyn's face. Then it spoke in a voice that sounded almost human. "After all this time, the bond has awakened again." Evelyn's stomach tightened. The creature smiled faintly. "He hid you well." Lucien's expression darkened instantly. "Do not speak to her." The Forgotten tilted its head slightly. "You always become protective when destiny returns to you." Evelyn looked sharply toward Lucien. "What is it talking about?" Lucien remained silent for one long second. Too long. Rain dripped slowly from the cemetery gates, while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the mountains. Finally, he spoke quietly. 400 years ago, the bond appeared once before." Evelyn stared at him. "With who?" His crimson eyes shifted toward her at last, filled with something deeper than fear. Grief. "A woman named Seraphina." The name lingered heavily in the freezing air. One of the hunters lowered his weapon slightly. Even the Forgotten seemed to grow quieter. Evelyn frowned. "And what happened to her?" Lucien looked away toward the graves. "She died because of me." Silence swallowed the cemetery again. Evelyn suddenly understood the exhaustion hidden behind his immortal face. It was not hunger she saw in him. It was guilt carried for centuries. The Forgotten stepped closer, silver eyes glowing brighter beneath the fog. "The old laws cannot be denied forever, Blood King." Lucien's jaw tightened sharply. "The old laws are dead." "No," the creature whispered. "They are waking." Suddenly the glowing marks on Evelyn's wrist burned painfully hot again. She gasped and grabbed her arm as crimson light spread farther beneath her skin than before. The Forgotten all turned toward her instantly. Every silver eye in the cemetery widened at once. Then Lucien looked at Evelyn with genuine alarm for the very first time. That should not be happening this fast. The ground beneath the cemetery trembled softly. Somewhere deep below the graves, ancient stone doors began to open. The trembling beneath the cemetery grew stronger. Small cracks spread across the stone path under Evelyn's boots while dust drifted upward between the graves, as though something deep underground had started breathing again after centuries asleep. The Forgotten all stepped backward at once. Not in fear, in reverence. Their silver eyes remained locked on Evelyn's glowing wrist while the crimson symbols continued spreading slowly beneath her skin, like ancient ink awakening vein by vein. Lucien moved closer immediately. "Look at me," he said firmly. Evelyn forced her eyes upward toward his pale face. The moment she met his crimson gaze, the burning eased. Slightly, her breathing steadied. Somehow his presence alone calmed the pain beneath her skin. "What is happening to me?" she whispered shakily. Lucien's expression tightened. "The bond is accelerating." "You keep saying that like I should understand it." Another tremor shook the cemetery harder this time. Several gravestones tilted sideways as low grinding sounds echoed beneath the earth. The hunters exchanged alarmed looks. One of them stepped toward Lucien quickly. "If the crypt opens completely, we will not be able to stop them." Evelyn looked between them in confusion. "Stop who?" Before anyone answered, the massive angel statue near the center of the cemetery suddenly cracked down the middle. Stone split apart with a deafening sound as ancient red light poured from the ground beneath it. The Forgotten immediately lowered their heads. Even the hunters looked shaken now. Lucien's eyes darkened as he stared toward the broken statue. "No," he murmured under his breath. Evelyn followed his gaze and felt cold spread through her entire body. A staircase had appeared beneath the shattered monument. Black stone steps descending deep underground into darkness lit faintly by crimson fire. Ancient symbols covered the walls below, glowing softly beneath layers of dust untouched for centuries. One of the Forgotten smiled faintly. "The old court awakens." Lucien turned sharply toward Evelyn. "You need to leave this place now." "Leave?" she repeated in disbelief. "You said they would follow me." "They will." "Then where exactly am I supposed to go?" Lucien opened his mouth to answer, but suddenly stopped. His eyes narrowed toward the staircase beneath the cemetery. Evelyn heard it a second later. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Echoing upward from the darkness below. Every creature in the cemetery went completely still. The Forgotten looked almost excited now while the hunters tightened their grip on silver weapons. Evelyn's pulse thundered painfully inside her chest as the footsteps grew louder. Closer. Then a tall figure finally emerged from the underground staircase, wearing a long black coat untouched by dust or time. Pale skin. White hair falling to his shoulders. Crimson. Eyes colder than winter itself. The stranger stopped the moment he saw Evelyn. Silence swallowed the cemetery. Then the ancient vampire smiled softly at Lucien. "Brother," he said calmly. "After 400 years, you finally found her again." The word brother hung heavily in the freezing air. Evelyn stared at the white-haired vampire standing at the base of the broken angel statue, while every instinct inside her screamed that something had just gone terribly wrong. Unlike Lucien, this vampire smiled too easily. Calm, elegant, dangerous in a way that felt almost welcoming. His crimson eyes settled on Evelyn with quiet fascination as he slowly climbed the remaining stone steps from the underground crypt. The Forgotten immediately moved aside for him. Not one of them dared block his path. Lucien stepped directly in front of Evelyn again. "You should not have awakened, Cassian." The ancient vampire called Cassian gave a soft, amused laugh. "And yet here I am." Rain drifted lightly through the cemetery again now, but none of it touched the brothers. Evelyn realized the storm itself seemed to bend around them unnaturally. Cassian stopped several feet away and tilted his head slightly while studying her glowing wrist. "Interesting," he murmured. "The bond is even stronger this time." Evelyn's patience finally snapped. "Would someone please explain why everyone keeps talking about me like I am part of some centuries-old nightmare?" Cassian's smile widened faintly. "Because you are." Lucien's expression darkened instantly. "Enough." The single word carried enough force to silence even the wind. Cassian raised both hands casually. "Still protective. Some things never change." Evelyn looked sharply toward Lucien. "You knew this would happen." Lucien remained silent. That silence hurt more than any answer. Her chest tightened as realization slowly settled in. "The gravestone," she whispered. "You knew my name before I ever spoke to you." Cassian watched her carefully now, almost sympathetically. "Of course he did." Lucien's jaw tightened sharply. "Cassian, she deserves the truth." The cemetery grew colder again. Beneath the cracked earth, distant stone doors continued, opening somewhere far below the crypt. The sound echoed upward through the graves like an ancient kingdom waking from sleep. Evelyn crossed her arms tightly against the freezing air. "Tell me the truth," she demanded quietly. Lucien finally looked at her fully, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she saw fear in his crimson eyes. Real fear. 400 years ago," he said softly, "I loved someone who carried the same bond you carry now." Evelyn's pulse slowed painfully. "Seraphina." He nodded once. Cassian's expression lost some of its amusement. "She died the night the old kingdom fell." Lucien closed his eyes briefly as though the memory itself still wounded him after centuries. "And when she died," Cassian continued quietly, "Lucien destroyed an empire." Silence swallowed the cemetery again. Evelyn stared at the pale vampire before her and suddenly understood why the hunters feared him and why the Forgotten bowed their heads when he spoke. Lucien was not simply dangerous. He was the last surviving king of something ancient enough to terrify monsters themselves. Then Cassian looked directly at Evelyn again. "The problem," he said softly, "is that Seraphina was never supposed to return." Evelyn could not breathe for several seconds. The cemetery suddenly felt unreal around her, like she had stepped into someone else's memory instead of her own life. Rain whispered softly across the graves while crimson fire flickered deep beneath the broken crypt staircase. Seraphina was never supposed to return. Cassian's words echoed painfully inside her head. She looked at Lucien again, searching his pale face for some sign that this was all a lie. But the grief inside his crimson eyes was too real to fake. "I am not her," Evelyn whispered. Lucien answered immediately. "I know." Yet something in his voice made her heart tighten harder instead of easing. Cassian studied them both quietly before speaking again. "The bond does not make mistakes." One of the hunters stepped closer carefully. "If the old laws truly awakened, then the throne beneath the crypt will awaken as well." Evelyn frowned. "What throne?" Cashin's faint smile returned. The throne of the Blood Court, the first kingdom vampires ever built before the war destroyed it centuries ago. The ground trembled again beneath their feet. Louder this time. Ancient bells suddenly began echoing from somewhere deep underground. Slow, hollow, like a kingdom announcing the return of its dead king. The Forgotten immediately lowered themselves to one knee around the cemetery. Every silver eye turned toward Lucien. Even the hunters looked shaken now. Evelyn stared at the pale vampire standing beside her as the bells continued ringing beneath the earth. They think you are their king, she whispered. Lucien's expression remained cold and unreadable, but exhaustion lingered behind his eyes. I was their king. And now? Silence. Cashin answered for him. Now the old kingdom wants him back. Lightning flashed violently across the cemetery sky. For one brief second, Evelyn saw massive black towers reflected behind Lucien like ghosts hidden inside the storm clouds. A castle. Ancient. Endless. Then the vision vanished. Evelyn stepped backward instinctively. What exactly am I supposed to be in all of this? Lucien finally looked directly at her again. You are the one thing this kingdom has waited centuries to find. The glowing symbols beneath Evelyn's wrist suddenly flared painfully bright again. She gasped as crimson lights spread across the cemetery ground in circular patterns beneath her feet. Ancient symbols ignited one after another between the graves. The crypt staircase below erupted with deep red fire. Cashin's calm expression disappeared for the first time. Lucien grabbed Evelyn's hand instantly as the entire cemetery shook beneath them. Stay close to me. The bells underground grew deafening now. Stone cracked somewhere below the crypt as enormous doors slowly opened beneath the earth.